Hello, I'm Julie Hyman from Yahoo Finance, and I'm really excited tonight to welcome you to a conversation with Hans Vestberg, CEO of Verizon, and Henrik Henriksson, who's the president and CEO of Scania, to talk about corporate sustainability and the important role that it has right now in ameliorating climate change. Please first watch this short video.
We've always been explorers, pilgrims, pioneers. Our curiosity urging us forward, seeking new lands, new ways, new ideas. Promise of new innovations, the infinite frontier before us.
Hans Vestberg and Henrik Henriksson, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. This is a really important conversation that we're having, and I think, thankfully, more and more people are now having it. However, when you think about corporations and you think about climate change and you think about sustainability, maybe a telecom company and a truck maker are not necessarily the first that you think of when you think of these, but more and more it's being incorporated into everything. But talk to me, first of all, just give me a little bit of an introduction as to how you're incorporating sustainability into your businesses. Henrik?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think the things that have changed lately is that there is a strong correlation between sustainability and profitability. So I think that you have that as a fundament of business, and our company, for example, we have decided to take a purpose that is to drive shift towards more sustainable transport solutions. And we're doing that because it comes from our culture, it comes from the DNA of our company, it comes from the legacy we have. We see now that today it's not enough anymore just to work to sort of fulfill the requirements from stakeholders as your employees or as your shareholders or as your customers. You also need to take a social responsibility. And that responsibility is needed today to provide both short-term and long-term a successful company.
Hans?
Yeah, no, I of course agree with Henrik, and I think that what I've seen the last 15 years is that the movement of bringing your responsibility into your core business, and I think that since I came into Verizon has been an extremely exciting time to see how we actually bring in what we have been doing for a long time, but make it to our core strategy, and we're doing it in many places. I usually say we do it because of two reasons. One, because it's good business. And secondly, we also do it because we're a very large corporation and we actually have a large responsibility. I mean, I usually refer to the Edelman report and the 100 biggest institutions in the world, 70 of them are corporations. And I guess Verizon would end up in that list. That means that in some cases, we have actually a bigger responsibility than a country. But we do it only when it's right for the strategy and it's part of the strategy. And I think that has been very rewarding the last 1.5 years, 2 years in Verizon, working with that and seeing that that's part of our current strategy and just capitalizing what we done earlier. I think that's where I come. And when we started, actually, when we launched the Verizon 2.0, which we did in November last year, we actually said we have North Star for 4 of the stakeholders. The shareholders, very clear where we want to go, customers, employees, and society, because all of them are part of our strategy. And that's what we try to articulate in that North Star. And I think that that's how we move forward, and all of them are hanging together. And as Henrik said, you cannot compromise in between them, because ultimately if you fail in the society, ultimately your customers don't want to buy from you. I usually say that if you don't pay your employees, I can tell you soon you will not have any shareholder value. So you need actually to manage all four of them, and that's, I feel it's very natural in Verizon. We're doing so much, and we've done it for a long time. We just brought it into the core strategy.
I'm curious not just about the corporate culture, but about your native culture. I don't know if you guys noticed.
He's Swedish.
We have a Hans. We have a Henrik. We have some accents, and indeed, both of them
speak Swedish.
Yes, both of them are Swedish accents. Is there anything about being Swedish or growing up in Sweden? Obviously, you both have global companies, but is there anything about being Swedish that has informed your desire to run sustainable companies?
Yeah, I think what comes from the culture, of course, is the Swedish culture is a closeness to nature. I think that is something we're all brought up with. I think also the fact of that half of the year is like dark and cold means that you need to plan fairly properly. So I think that you have this sort of planning horizon, which I think also means that we are quite fact-based, and we'll listen to fact and we'll listen to science as well. I think on top of that, I think we are a small country, which means that we are dependent as companies and also as individuals, that we need to see the world as our arena. We cannot just look at our small domestic market, and I think that creates quite an international touch as well. So I think there is a Swedish heritage that is sort of conveying quite well with sustainability. There is.
We discussed this a little bit earlier today on. I don't have the facts, but I think also the Swedish society has been very equal. Equality has been for a long time. Every voice is heard, which brings out all the stakeholders constantly in that environment, which I think is very healthy for your decision making, that you think 360 all the time. Then I agree totally with Henrik. You know, you come from a country which is so small, you know, that I guess it's a third of New Jersey. Ultimately, you need to be global. You need to understand different cultures. You need to work with diversity every day. And I think that's part of it as well. But and then we have the nature, as Henrik said as well. But I don't know the couple of ingredients, but if you think about many Swedish companies, they have been around for a long, long time, and they have actually succeeded in different changes of transformational technology or whatever. So there is something there that, of course, has created that resilience and that sustainability for companies.
So I'd like to get a little specific if we can. So Henrik, talk to me about what kind of initiatives you're doing inside of your company, and when you're developing different trucks and different engines, how you are trying to make them more sustainable.
Yeah, so basically two things we're doing. We're trying to sort of make sure that our own CO2 footprint in our production, in our sourcing, and all the activities we're doing out in our workshops where our vehicles are coming for service and so on, that operation itself is sustainable. I think that is one side of it. And the other one is, of course, to try to develop as sustainable products as possible that has the least CO2 footprint when they're out in operation. When you build a truck or a bus today, you can say that if you look at the life length of a vehicle, maybe the production process is only 4 or 5% of the total sort of impact during the life length. The rest is when it's out on the vehicles. So for us, it's about providing vehicles that can run as efficient as possible. But looking at where we are today and looking at the targets we agreed upon in Paris when it comes to reduce CO2, transport is representing 15-70% of the global CO2, so we are a big part of the problem. But there is a solution to this, and that is to work with biofuels, and it's to work with electrification. Try to move away from fossil fuels, and that is what we're trying to do. And trying to provide that by working closely together with our customers, but also with our customer's customer, the ones that actually design the logistical system. They don't buy buses or trucks from us, but they design the logistical system. So work with them and work with policymakers to try to change legislation, taxation of fuels. So trying to take away all these hurdles that there is to transform so that we can run these big vehicles on a sustainable way right here, right now. unfortunately, there is a tendency in technology industry to talk about that silver bullet that might come in the future sometime and not focus on here and now. The targets we agreed upon in Paris, they're not waiting for anyone. We need to act here and now, and I think that is our approach. So that is how we're trying to transform not only the company, Scania, but actually trying to transform our whole industry to take this by leading the way.
And Hans, obviously we're not making trucks at Verizon, but our employees drive trucks, right? They're
Yes.
driving when they're making repairs, et cetera. And the company uses energy. So I know that's part of Verizon's plan, is to change the sourcing of that energy, or change the proportion of it at least. Talk us through some of those goals.
Yeah, I think that usually when the conversation we have had internally when we talked about our responsibility, a couple of areas came very close to our hearts, of course. Education, which we have worked for a long time in the investment there. And then climate change and what we can do there. And I think it's also symptomatic how I believe you should drive things. I mean, you start with yourself. And I think that our team started with ourselves and said that, okay, what are commitments we are doing? I mean, we committed 2 things, 2035, carbon neutral, 2025, 50% of all the electricity consumption should come from renewable energy. And then we decided that, the team decided we need to finance it. And then we went out to ask for a green bond, and a green bond of $1 billion in order to finance the investment we need to do. And then at least I feel that we have done what we can do. Now I can talk to other corporations, use my IoT, work with this, connect the cars, connect the trucks, because we're reusing it. I think it's hard just starting to tell everybody else what to do. I think this is typically how I see you should do it, because you need to start with yourself. Do something yourself before you tell others to do it. I think in education is exactly the same. Our commitment to over X amount of years, $400 million to education, especially in schools. We have a lot of Title I children which don't have access to connectivity, broadband, STEM education. Again, it's part of our strategy. It's a business case. It's a business case for us doing CO2 emission neutral by 2035, renewable energy. It's a business case for us to actually get connectivity out in these areas, which we're doing because that's our business. But it's also a business that all these children gets them education, because ultimately we want them in our company and we need them for the US, because that's where digitalization is going. So again, for me, it hangs together. It's nothing separate. It's part of the strategy, what we're doing every day in the company, and then we do it internally and we can talk about it externally. And we have several other areas where we're working as well, but those are 2 very clear commitments that we're doing this week. We have a couple of other commitments that we will do on Saturday, but I cannot talk to them because my PR tells me that it's secret. So I wait till Saturday. So on Saturday at the Global Citizen, we're going to do more commitments on stage, how we're going to take the next year. Last year, we committed to continue to develop our education, and I think we've added more than 50 schools the last year that is connected, and we're continuing, and it's important that you follow up on your commitments.
But I think this mindset that you're describing, Hans, I think it's very important also that not to see sustainability as something you put on top. You need to build it into the organization. I think we think the same. We don't have a sustainability strategy. We have a sustainable strategy. Yeah. And that's the way you build it in. And you need to do that today to otherwise you are not trustworthy. Otherwise you don't get the people with you in the company to join you on this journey. So you need to, and they need to feel that they recognize the direction. So if you put on and run sustainability as a campaign or as a program, it will not fly. You need to find something in the soul and the values of the company and the history that you can build it on, so that people recognize themselves. That's when it sticks. And I think
there you and I are agreed. We have a history together. We've worked together in many years, and we actually share that. I mean, because it's very clear when you have a project where it's outside the company, the day you have some tougher times, that's the first thing that goes. But if you embed it in your supply chain, that you procure in a certain way, it's part of your strategy, that is main strategy. So when it comes to tougher times, you need to look at everything. You don't have that as a separate project. And I think that I'm proud of what Verizon has done the last 2 years. They have done a lot before as well. But the progress that I've seen in the company done and the commitments we're doing, that's embedded in the strategy. We're a lot more to do, but it's encouraging to see.
Henrik, you mentioned the Paris Climate Accords and the goals are not going to wait. And I think we have seen this sort of increased urgency around all of these issues expressed in the climate strikes that we saw last Friday, expressed in the voices of many of the youth activists who have been very vocal over the past several days. How urgent is this? Do you, especially since you both run big organizations, are you satisfied with the speed with which all of this is happening?
No, not really. But I would say that it's accelerated tremendously the last couple of months, and I think that is good. I think that the youth is coming out in the street, is putting pressure on, not only on corporate, but mainly also on politicians. So I think that, and there is signs that I think we are reaching out across the aisle between corporates and policymakers and saying, okay, let's fix this together. So I think that is encouraging. So, but I think it is urgent. I mean, it is the biggest challenge that mankind has ever faced, and we need to sort of take it seriously. And as a company leader or as a CEO, you, of course, you can have that inner motivation that I have myself, that I think this is one of the biggest things, and you want to leave something better behind when it comes to the planet than you inherited it. You have the responsibility towards your children and so on. But the thing is that what people need to wake up in the corporate world and understand also that it makes perfect business sense as well. It's the greatest opportunity for growth. It's the greatest opportunity for innovation. And it's here in front of us. We just need to grab it. And if you do not transform, you will be irrelevant. I mean, it will take a couple of years maybe in certain industries. Then you will reach a tipping point when you're not relevant anymore, because if you don't provide products and services that are sustainable, no one will buy from you. And no one would invest in you as a company, like Hans was in there. Yeah. And no one would like to work for you. So this is about also resilience. It is about sort of positioning the company in the right direction. And I think those are the things that are starting to move now. And hopefully we are accelerating. But we need to work in partnership with policymakers, and that's the way to put in the second gear.
I can only agree. I mean, what Henrik is saying, I think that's you have seen a tremendous change the last. I mean, I usually refer back to the first time I went to Davos, which was many, many years ago. There was a couple of CEOs that talked about that it's mobility, broadband, and cloud is important for the sustainable transformation, etc. If you went there last year, I would say that any private sector individual would actually do something that is improving from the corporate strategy. And I think that's a good sign. If it's good enough or if it's enough, I don't know. But it's a sign of an enormous and tremendous change in over 10 years maybe that we see from a commitment level. And hopefully the youth and all the commitments are bringing people to actually stand for the commitments, and corporations are standing for the commitments, and policymakers as well. I think that's what we need the whole corporations and governments through to.
Both of you have now mentioned policymakers, so I think we should expand on that a little bit also, because obviously corporations have a responsibility, policymakers have a responsibility. What do you think the balance should be? What do you think the balance is right now? Because it certainly on some fronts in the United States, we have stepped back from that. We stepped back from the Paris Accord, for example. So what do you expect of government as you're doing this, or do you feel that the private sector has to push forward on its own?
I would say that, I mean, first of all, you do what you can control. We are controlling our company. We're 140,000 employees. We control our destiny. We take our decisions every day, and we'll continue to do so. They have their stakeholders, and whatever politicians are doing, that's their job. But I think, again, you focus on what you can do yourself first, and then you can talk about others. I think that's how I feel about it. I mean, you can always talk about policymakers, and they should do this and that in whatever country you are in. They have their word as well, which probably is complicated in some cases. So I think that it goes back to your responsibility, and it goes back to the Edelman report. And we probably are one of the top 100 institutions in the world, and that means that we have our responsibility and we take that.
I think that what we need to do between the corporates and the policymakers is try to sort of get away from this sitting on either side of a fence and throwing the ball to each other and then trying to guess what the other one meant. We need to break that fence down and sit and talk together in the same room and try to solve the issues. the complexity of these questions now, when it comes to sustainability, is it's difficult. It is, and it's difficult both for corporates to sort of maneuver in these areas, and it's just as difficult for the policymakers. So if we share the knowledge and experience and sit down together, I think that's the quickest way to take away the hurdles. So I think it is that we need to have a different mindset. It's not we and them or us and them. It's us together that can fix this, that requires a certain maturity, both from, I think, corporate leaders, but also from the politicians. But
Do you feel like that's starting to happen?
Yeah, I would say that I think in many parts of the world I see that actually corporates are pushing forward now, and they are maybe held back a little bit by hurdles or policies that are. At the same time, policymakers are taking decisions maybe that are linked to not so much. I can take one example. I mean, for us providing vehicles, I mean, CO2 is a matter of sort of how much energy you produce and use in a vehicle. That we can probably find a sort of self-motivating business model with our customers, because less fuel becomes less cost for them, and that's less CO2. But when it comes to particles and NOx, for example, in the city like New York, that you probably need a regulator to say, okay, here's the limit, not more than that. So I think that we work together. One thing, though, is important that we don't sort of legislate on technology as such. Let the companies be innovative and find the solutions. Describe what is the problem that we need to fix, and then let us sort. And I think that is, but still, it's about sort of reaching out across that aisle and doing this together.
Are you all hearing about a lot of interesting clean energy technologies that you're excited about? Do you feel like there's a lot of good innovation on that front?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I know my sector best, so I don't know in general, but I mean, I would say that, yes, when it comes to vehicle technology, of course, there's a lot of exciting things happening with electrical vehicles. We shouldn't jump too much, though, too quick, because, I mean, today when we produce a battery, the CO2 footprint of that battery in production as such is quite tremendous. So we need to work with the supply chain of how do we produce more sustainable batteries, how do we then produce sustainable energy, electricity to put in these vehicles. And of course there we need the policymakers and the governments to make investments in infrastructure for charging and so on as well. So we need to work together. But there is, I mean, we believe that we can decarbonize the whole transport sector on road globally by 2050. We can probably do it even a little bit quicker, and we can do it in a profitable way. And that study we've done all over the world. And so there is technology, electrification, but also then, of course, other interesting things like hydrogen and fuel cells. But right now, here and now, it is about moving away from that fossil fuels that we put into the vehicles, put in renewable fuels from waste or biofuels that are coming from forestry industry or agriculture. That is the quickest way to move over. So
you're saying you think not just your company, but industry-wide, that we can move away from fossil fuels in vehicles by 2050?
Yeah, and then I'm talking about heavy commercial vehicles, like the big trucks and the big buses, which is a little bit the most difficult one to crack, I would say. When it comes to passenger cars, I would say we will do it within 10 years.
I think that, yes, we see also innovation around it, but here the most important is that you have an integrated supply chain. I mean, an integrated supply chain means for me that we work with our suppliers and we work with our customers in order to get it. All of us have alignment that we need to be better on this. We produce a lot of data bits, a lot of infrastructure, and we consume electricity or power in general. So if we work with our partners that are delivering our equipment that is better and more efficient, that can use different type of energy sources, is important, and that our customer understand that if they're going to use it in a certain environment. So I think that's what we're trying to do in our supply chain much more, and putting demands on the people that works with us, but also align what we want to do, and then you start to see innovation, and again, it comes back to it's a good business case for us, but it's also a responsibility for us because we are in the middle of the supply chain. We're investing somewhere between our guidance for this year, so it's not a finance meeting this, but 17 to 18 billion US dollars in capex every year. We have a big say in the supply chain if we do it right, and what I see from our supply chain is they are in collaboration, because it's not telling that you are doing wrong or you are doing wrong and we are so fine. We just need to work together, because we need to change things in order to get renewable energy to us as well. So for me, it's an ecosystem work that is important, but we have a big say in it.
And actually, Hans, that's an example of that ecosystem. I mean, we were both touching sort of, we are part of an industry or that industry sector, but we are touching so many others in transport and in, of course, in communication. But one area where I think innovation that we are doing together is, of course, also linked to sustainability is digitalization. And something we used to work on a couple of years ago was to connect all the trucks and buses around the world. So since 2011, all our trucks and buses are connected. Today we have around 400,000 connected vehicles sending information every minute through the network, wherever we are in the world, where they are, how they're performing. And from that we can actually see that even in developed markets like in Europe, for example, the average truck is only loaded by 60%. So 40% is waste, it's air. So with this technology, with the Internet of Things or digitalization, we can, of course, identify these vehicles and make sure that they are being full instead. Overnight, we could actually take away 40% CO2 emissions. I think that just shows how powerful...
Yeah. And the combination of, again, I'm repeating myself all the time because I think it's so important, but the mobility, broadband, and cloud, that combination is the 21st century's infrastructure, and that's where it can work together. And I even had some product innovation for Scania once in a time. I said that, the whole engine is a computer one day and you're connected, you don't need to give away all the horsepower from the beginning. You can buy them prepaid or whenever you need them. They're not there yet, but they will be. I mean, ultimately, you only need as much efficiency if you have the fully loaded truck. And then when you don't have the fully loaded truck, you can have a lighter engine. All that type of things can only happen when you have that. And of course, knowing that 40% is not loaded, giving advice to the drivers to drive much carefully, which is a big thing. Just imagine how many trucks or buses out on the road. There's a lot of connectivity between our industry, and ultimately when it comes to the next generation connectivity, also start to have them autonomous or semi-autonomous and all of that, which I know that you have worked a lot with, which of course is a nicer stream of how you drive and all of that, take down CO2 emissions. So it's a lot of, these industries are combining assets over time in order to be more efficient, which I think is extremely exciting. And of course, mobility, broadband, cloud, I can go to another industry as well, because ultimately that's part of the transformation that we need to do in order to be sustainable.
Yeah, I think the efficiency piece is a really interesting and important point to make, and it's one that in the sustainability conversation it's not as sort of sexy, but it's obviously very, very important to all of it. So you're talking to an audience of folks who are employees and people also who are sort of in other sustainable industries. And I think in talking to the general public, they are coming around to all of this. What about investors? I mean, me being a finance reporter, that's one of my questions always. You had the green bond, obviously, so that's part of it. But do you think that investors are now coming around, particularly in the United States, where perhaps we were a little bit slower to realize the value of these issues?
I think that it's also a responsibility for you as a leader, as a company, to articulate why this is important. But clearly we see much more questions about it, KPIs to be reported that you're a responsible company. So clearly, I mean, you can take over 10 years, a dramatic change on the questions. But it's part also that you need to articulate what you're doing and how it hangs together with your strategy and why it's important, as Henrik said, because that's, you always have a sort of a strategy and a story you tell to the street, and then this has to be part of it. So I think it's also up to us to articulate it why we think it's so important. But clearly, investors are asking more questions about it. There are more KPIs coming up. And I think that is just showing how interesting it is. And I said it also that our green bond was oversubscribed many, many times. And we asked for 1 billion, and we probably could have taken so much more. But we only had projects for the billion. But clearly there's a demand in the market for this type of investment. So that clearly shows that the investment community believes in it as well.
Yeah, I mean, being a European company, we see, of course, that there has been implementing a lot of reporting and that you need to fill and sort of fulfill. But I think we have moved now the last 2 years over to that a lot of the investors are going almost away from the standard reporting, and they're doing more deep dives, really to trying to figure out and understand, is the business model as such sustainable? Is the management meaning, what they talk about, is that happening? How have they put a CO2 on carbon when they do their investment calculations? I mean, they go down much more in detail, I would say. So I see it coming and becoming more and more evident. And I think it has to do also that there's so many studies now showing that there is a strong correlation between profitability and sustainability. I mean, there are studies done at Oxford, at Harvard, and that correlation is strong. And I think that triggers the investors also to move in this direction. So, and I think they get more and more skilled in these topics as well.
Do you think then that all of what we're talking about, to kind of bring it all together and synthesize it, that there's almost a new social contract between business and society because of this responsibility? I mean, I think if you go back to, say, the 1950s in the United States, you had the sort of paternalistic view or attitude of corporations towards their employees to take care of them. Do you think this new version of this now is this responsibility to sustainability and, frankly, to other issues that sort of blend with it, like you were talking about, education, inclusivity as well, all part of that?
Yeah, I think it is. I think we are heading that way now, and I think it's very encouraging. And it is I think companies companies are led by normal people. I mean, normal individuals. I think that yes. Actually, flesh and blood.
It's hard to believe.
Yeah. So I mean, and of course we are influenced what's happening in the world, and I mean taking on, and then of course you have a platform that you can use to be able to create change. But definitely, I think that there is a completely different responsibility. But otherwise, you will not be trustworthy to the stakeholders you have, the society or the people working together with you, or the investor, and definitely not the customers. I mean, they will eventually just say that. I mean, why should I do business?
They'll tweet
with
at you.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we are heading for that. I think you're spot on. I mean, it's a new kind of social contract. We need to take responsibility as a corporate social citizen of the global world.
Yeah, and I mean, you're here to lead a company that you want to exist in perpetuity. That's how you're thinking every day you come into work and think about what are the things you need to do that this company is a perpetuity. And then, of course, as everything else changing around you, you change also the social contract. I mean, and I think that's, for me, is there's a lot of unsolved problems thinking in the future as well. I mean, the youth are coming into the workplace. They are thinking differently. They're not like me and Henrik, I spent 28 years in my first company, so that's nothing that graduates from university say I'm going to do 28 years in one company. So they want to be in a different type of employment status and all of that. How does it work with a social contract with employees? Responsible still for the employees? How are they part of the purpose you're driving? Feeling that the values that you have created internally is also theirs. There's a lot of new things you need to think about in the social contracts going forward, including what we're talking about here. But ultimately, you need a purpose, because I see everything as sort of let's say, you have a strategy, you have a purpose, and what is embedding all that to work is that you have an internal and external values and some philosophies how you lead the company. Those are equally important, in order to execute your strategy, that you're harmonized around those. And that you need to think about, because those are commitments and social contracts with all the stakeholders, your customers, your society, your shareholders, your employees. That's embedded in that for me, and that's why you constantly need to move that as you're a company that want to live in perpetuity.
Just have a couple minutes left. I'm curious if you, just as a final thought, if you have any advice for other companies that are trying to increase their sustainable practices.
Henrik has a lot.
Yeah.
But I think one advice, of course, you can do the normal thing of sort of going through a model of trying to see how do you make sure that you your own footprint is sustainable in everything you do, and of course you try to change the products and services or whatever your value proposition is to your customer, that you try to build in sustainability into that. And I think that's the basics. But my advice would be that if you really want to do this to stick and for real, and had this long-term view that Hans was into, you need to start dig into the sort of like the inner values of the company and find what is it really that we represent, and what link to sustainability can we sort of hook this journey up on, and not trying to sort of put on a new sort of label or a new wet blanket on the organization. Rather listen to them. What is it that you can sort of build a sustainability journey on, and you will find something. I'm sure you will find something that is individual and unique for that company, and build on that. Do not sort of create a new story or something. Build on what you have, build on the legacy. Then people will recognize it. And if you don't have the people with you in the company, nothing will happen.
So you were right, he had the answers.
Yeah, he always, you know, he's running a very successful company. Now, in my case, I think that Henrik articulated very well. I mean, I believe very much it is included in the corporate strategy, but it also is behaviors. And sometimes I always tell that when I go to the leadership trainings we have at Verizon, I tell them, you know, you don't know how much people are looking up to you, and how much they think about what you're doing, and how you act, and how you behave, and what rituals you have, and all of that. And of course, when it comes to sustainability, there are things that are small, that are important to do, that people see that you care about it. Then there are big commitments like 2035 or all of that. And I think that combination becomes very important in companies. And I try to think, I probably fail every day, but I try to think about it that people are looking at me, how I behave and my rituals, and hopefully then others are doing it as well. So that's also part of how you embed this in a company, how you behave, and the things you're doing every day. Even though they might be very small, they're very important.
Well, and part of that is having conversations like this about what we are all doing. Thank you so much. Hans Vestberg, CEO of Verizon, Henrik Henriksson, CEO of Scania. Thank you both so much. Appreciate it.